the golden age of Hollywood, a time when silver screens glimmered, dreams were sculpted by light, and every smile seemed perfect. But behind the polished glamour lay a world built on silence. For many actors, one truth could destroy everything: the truth of who they loved. From the 1920s through the early 1960s, homosexuality wasn't just taboo, it was career suicide. Studios controlled every gesture, every photograph, every word printed about their stars. And so countless men and women lived double lives, hiding their hearts behind publicity stills and arranged marriages, performing not just for the camera but for the world. Tonight we reveal 16 stories from that hidden Hollywood of courage concealed in shadows, of love denied but never erased. Each story is a fragment of a much larger truth, that the golden glow of cinema was cast by people who often had to hide in the dark. Before we begin, if you believe these forgotten stories deserve to be remembered, please take a moment to subscribe and like. Your support helps keep Hollywood's real history alive, beyond the headlines, beyond the myths. Now let's step back into that shimmering world and meet the men and women who lived two lives beneath one spotlight. Rock Hudson, he was the very image of the American leading man, tall, broad-shouldered, effortlessly handsome. Rock Hudson's smile sold movie tickets, magazine covers, and the illusion of the perfect bachelor. Yet the man who embodied romance on screen was living a secret off it. Under the tight grip of Universal Studios and his powerful agent Henry Wilson, Hudson's public life was carefully manufactured. He was sent on stage dates with actresses, photographed at premieres arm in arm, even married briefly to Wilson's secretary to silence whispers. But within Hollywood's quiet inner circles, the truth was known: Hudson loved men. Friends protected his privacy, lovers were kept invisible, and for decades he carried the weight of that hidden existence. Then came 1985. Hudson, frail and ailing, revealed to the world that he had AIDS, becoming the first major celebrity to do so. In that single courageous act, the facade shattered. What began as a tragedy became a turning point. His announcement forced the world to confront an epidemic long ignored and gave a human face to suffering many preferred not to see. Rock Hudson died later that year at 59. But in his final days, he did what Hollywood never allowed him to do. He lived openly, truthfully, and in doing so, he changed how the world saw both AIDS and the people it afflicted. Hudson's legacy is not only cinematic, it's deeply human. The matinee idol who once pretended to love on screen ended his life by showing the world what love really looked like: honesty, vulnerability, and courage. Raymond Burr. To audiences, Raymond Burr was the embodiment of authority. Perry Mason, the brilliant defense attorney who never lost a case. Ironside, the unflinching detective in a wheelchair. Off-screen, Burr was a man constructing a life as carefully as any courtroom argument. In a Hollywood obsessed with appearances, he created an entire mythology to keep suspicion at bay. He spoke of a wife who had died, of a child lost tragically, stories later proven entirely fictional. These were shields, built to protect the truth he could never reveal. That truth was his decades-long partnership with Robert Benavides, a quiet, kind-hearted man who shared his home, his work, and his life for over 30 years. Their bond was an open secret among friends but invisible to the public. Burr knew that one headline could end everything he'd fought to build. Behind the calm gravitas of his screen persona lay the exhaustion of constant concealment. Yet within his private world there was warmth and devotion. Those who knew him spoke of loyalty, humor, and quiet generosity, qualities that rarely made it into fan magazines but defined the man far more than fame ever could. When Burr died in 1993, Benavides was by his side. Only then did many colleagues finally acknowledge what had been true all along. Raymond Burr had lived a full life, one divided by necessity, not choice. His story, like Rock Hudson's, reminds us that behind Hollywood's strongest faces were hearts that had to fight simply to be themselves. Tab Hunter. In the 1950s, few names shone brighter than Tab Hunter. With his clean-cut smile, golden hair, and all-American charm, he was every studio's dream, a symbol of youth, innocence, and uncomplicated masculinity. But behind the studio lights and fan mail, Hunter was living a secret that could have destroyed everything. Born Arthur Kelm, he was discovered by an agent who sculpted him into Tab Hunter, the kind of name that could headline a romance or sell 1,000 posters. Warner Bros. Built his image carefully, a wholesome boy next door adored by women. But off-camera, Hunter was a man forced into silence. Every handshake, every photo opportunity was part of a lie. When Confidential magazine threatened to expose his sexuality, the studio went into crisis mode, arranging fake dates with actresses to save his career. The pressure was unbearable. Hunter longed to be himself, but in that era, truth was a luxury no star could afford. Decades later, he finally broke the silence. In his 2005 memoir, Tab Hunter Confidential, he spoke openly about his relationships, including one with fellow actor Anthony Perkins. His honesty resonated deeply, turning shame into strength. The boy once trapped in a studio's fantasy became a man who told his own story, and in doing so, helped others tell theirs. Anthony Perkins. He terrified audiences as Norman Bates in Psycho, but in real life Anthony Perkins lived a quieter horror, the fear of being found out. Sensitive, intelligent, and deeply private, Perkins was one of Hollywood's most complex figures, a man torn between love and expectation. In public, he was polite and reserved, the model of mid-century charm. In private, he was a man searching for connection in a world that forbade it. He had relationships with men including Tab Hunter, but the weight of secrecy pushed him toward conformity. When he married actress Barry Berenson, it wasn't only love, it was survival. Perkins was brilliant but conflicted, carrying the constant anxiety of exposure. Hollywood in the 1950s offered no mercy for difference. To be gay was to risk exile. So he buried his truth, channeled his isolation into art, and gave the world a character who was both monstrous and heartbreakingly human. In the early 1990s, when AIDS still carried immense stigma, Perkins became one of its silent victims. He died in 1992, his illness hidden until after his death. Even in his final days, the fear that shaped his life still lingered, but his performances, layered with empathy and complexity, told the story he could not. James Dean was rebellion personified, the restless youth who gave a generation permission to feel. With only 3 films, he became immortal, but behind the myth of the misunderstood rebel was a man far more enigmatic than the world ever knew. Those who knew Dean spoke of contradictions. He was magnetic yet solitary, defiant yet deeply vulnerable. Rumors about his sexuality began early, whispered through Hollywood's cocktail circles. Some said he was bisexual, others believed he was entirely uninterested in labels. Dean himself once said, "I'm not going to go through life with one hand tied behind my back." In the 1950s, such words were revolutionary and dangerous. He formed close bonds with both men and women, and his circle included many from the LGBTQ community. Yet his public image remained untouched, sculpted by Warner Bros. Into that of the perfect outsider hero. When Dean died in a car crash at just 24, much of him remained a mystery. Perhaps that's why his legend endures, because he represented something Hollywood could never quite define: freedom of spirit, of expression, of identity. Whether or not he ever spoke it aloud, Dean lived as though the rules didn't apply, and that defiance became his legacy. Cary Grant was the embodiment of sophistication, charming, elegant, and effortlessly witty. Audiences adored him, and Hollywood worshipped him. But behind the smooth exterior of its most debonair star lay a question that still lingers. Who was the real Cary Grant? Born Archibald Leach in Bristol, England, Grant's climb from poverty to stardom was extraordinary, yet fame brought its own prison. Throughout his life, rumors followed him, whispers of romances not just with women but with men, particularly his longtime companion Randolph Scott. The two lived together for years, sharing a home filled with warmth and laughter, even posing for magazine spreads that painted them as carefree bachelors. Studio executives, however, were less amused. Publicists scrambled to pair Grant with actresses, manufacturing relationships to maintain his matinee idol status. Grant never publicly addressed the rumors. Perhaps he didn't need to. In his charm there was always a touch of mystery, an elegance that defied easy labels. Whatever his private truth, he navigated Hollywood's rigid expectations with grace. And maybe that's what made him timeless, not just his style or wit, but his quiet refusal to let anyone define who he was. Montgomery Clift was the original tortured artist, beautiful, brilliant, and broken. He arrived in Hollywood like a storm from the theater world, sensitive, intellectual, and utterly unlike the rugged leading men of his time. On screen, his performances burned with a raw humanity that audiences had never seen before. But behind those haunting eyes lay a man at war with himself. Studios tried to pair him with glamorous women, desperate to tame his mystery. Yet Clift's heart followed no script. His truest connection was with Elizabeth Taylor, who loved him as a brother and guarded his secret with unwavering loyalty. In 1956, a near-fatal car crash shattered his face and something within him. The painkillers dulled the agony, but the deeper pain came from years of hiding his truth. He once wrote, "The saddest thing I know is loving quietly, the happiest too." That line was Montgomery Clift, a man of contradictions, whose art thrived on longing and repression. He never fit neatly into Hollywood's expectations, and he never pretended to. When he died in 1966, the studios whispered about tragedy, but what he truly left behind was something greater. A legacy of honesty through pain, proof that vulnerability is not weakness, but its own kind of courage. George CUKOR. Few directors defined the sophistication of Hollywood's golden age like George CUKOR. He gave the world The Philadelphia Story, Gaslight, and My Fair Lady, films that celebrated wit, glamour, and complex women. But behind his artistry was a private life lived carefully, quietly, and courageously. CUKOR was one of the few openly gay men in Hollywood's inner circles, though never publicly out. He hosted gatherings at his Beverly Hills home, where closeted actors, writers, and producers could exhale for a night without fear. These parties became legends, sanctuaries where men and women could laugh, dance, and for a few hours live freely. The studio system tolerated him because of his genius. He had an uncanny ability to direct emotion, to bring depth to female characters in ways male directors rarely did. Perhaps his empathy came from his own experience, understanding what it meant to hide behind a performance. CUKOR never spoke publicly about his sexuality, but he didn't need to. His humanity spoke through his work. He created spaces of safety and art in a world that offered neither to people like him. In his films, full of grace, humor, and quiet defiance, George CUKOR gave Hollywood something more enduring than fame: compassion. If you're still watching, thank you for taking this journey through Hollywood's hidden history. These stories remind us that behind every spotlight, there's a shadow, and within that shadow, courage. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, give this video a like, and share it with someone who loves classic cinema. It helps us bring these untold stories into the light where they finally belong. Ramon Novarro. Before sound found its voice, Hollywood had Ramon Novarro, the silent screen's dark-eyed idol. Born in Mexico, he rose from obscurity to international fame with his role in Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, 1925. He was elegance personified, noble, magnetic, and adored by millions. But like so many of his peers, Novarro's greatest performance was the one no camera ever caught. He was a gay man in an era that demanded invisibility. Behind the studio's carefully polished image was a life lived in quiet secrecy. He never married, though fan magazines invented romances for him. He entertained discreetly, surrounded by friends who understood the unspoken rules of survival. Yet, for all his caution, he couldn't escape the cruelty of fate. In 1968, long after his fame had faded, Novarro was murdered in his own home by two men he had invited over. The press turned his death into lurid headlines, exposing what he had hidden for decades. But to those who knew him, he wasn't a scandal, he was a pioneer, one of the first Latin stars of Hollywood, and a man who paid the price for a world that never let him be himself. Today, his name stands not for tragedy, but for the bravery of simply existing when existence itself was forbidden. William Haines. If Ramon Novarro lived in silence, William "Billy" Haines lived in defiance. He was one of MGM's brightest stars in the 1920s, charming, handsome, and effortlessly funny. Audiences adored him. The studios adored him even more, until he refused to play by their rules. When MGM boss Louis B. Mayer discovered that Haines was living openly with his partner Jimmy Shields, he issued an ultimatum: end the relationship or end your career. Haines chose love. He walked away from the silver screen at the height of his fame, trading stardom for authenticity. Hollywood shut its doors, but Haines built another life. He and Shields became celebrated interior designers, working for stars like Joan Crawford and even Ronald Reagan. Their home became a haven of warmth and laughter, proof that love could outlast the cruelty of the industry that once rejected them. They remained together for nearly 50 years until Haines' death in 1973. Their devotion became legendary, a real love story in a city of make-believe. In a time when being yourself could destroy you, William Haines proved that sometimes integrity is the most radical form of success. Sael Mineo's face was unforgettable, vulnerable, soulful, and searching. At 16, he became one of the youngest actors ever nominated for an Academy Award, playing Plato in Rebel Without a Cause. His portrayal of a lonely, misunderstood boy resonated deeply, and for many, it was one of the first queer-coded performances in mainstream film. Mineo's sensitivity set him apart. But as he grew older, Hollywood didn't know what to do with him. He was too emotional, too intense, too unwilling to pretend. And in an industry obsessed with image, that was fatal. By the 1970s, Mineo began living more openly as a gay man, directing theater and pursuing projects that spoke to his truth. It was a brave choice in an unkind time. But in 1976, at only 37, he was murdered outside his Los Angeles apartment. The press dismissed it as a robbery, but for many, it symbolized the end of innocence, the silencing of one of Hollywood's most tender souls. Today, his work endures as a portrait of yearning and courage, a reminder that even the smallest roles can carry the weight of truth. Farley Granger was Hollywood's golden boy of suspense, tall, dark, and impossibly magnetic. He starred in Hitchcock's Rope, 1948, and Strangers on a Train, 1951, playing characters torn between desire and morality, themes that mirrored his own life. Privately, Granger was bisexual and unashamed among friends, though discreet in public. He refused the sham marriages that studios proposed to protect his image. He loved freely, forging relationships with both women and men, including playwright Arthur Laurence. In his 2007 memoir Include Me Out, Granger wrote with candor about his life and loves, decades after most of his contemporaries had passed. He didn't hide, nor did he dramatize. He simply told the truth, and that honesty was revolutionary. Though his career shifted from film to theater, his legacy grew stronger with time. Farley Granger was proof that authenticity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers and endures. In a world built on illusion, He chose something far rarer: honesty. Clifton Webb, elegant, witty, unapologetically refined. Clifton Webb wasn't like other leading men, and that's precisely why audiences loved him. From Laura to Sitting Pretty, Webb's sharp intelligence and dry humor made him unforgettable. He never married, lived with his mother until her death, and made no effort to disguise his nature. Within Hollywood, everyone knew, but no one dared speak aloud what was obvious. He was gay, and he was brilliant, and he refused to apologize for either. In an era when scandal could destroy careers, Webb managed to remain untouched, partly because he didn't fit the romantic mold studios demanded of their male stars. Instead, he carved a niche for himself, playing aristocrats, cynics, and men of sophistication. He turned difference into distinction. Off-screen, Webb was charming but private. He preferred conversation to confession, wit to sentiment. He left behind no controversy, no downfall, only admiration. His legacy is one of quiet confidence, proof that authenticity doesn't always need a spotlight. DIRK BOGARDE. Across the Atlantic, another artist was walking the same delicate line. DIRK BOGARDE was Britain's answer to Cary Grant, suave, intelligent, and intensely introspective. He dominated European cinema through the 1950s and 60s, playing men of mystery and restraint. For over 40 years, he lived with his manager and partner, Tony Forwood. They were inseparable, their relationship an open secret in the industry, but never publicly confirmed. In England, where homosexuality remained illegal until 1967, their discretion was both survival and devotion. Bogarde's performance in Victim 1961 was a turning point, the first British film to address homosexuality directly and sympathetically. Many believed he took the role as an act of courage, knowing it could end his career. Instead, it deepened it. His sensitivity gave the film its soul, and his silence gave it power. Bogarde never came out publicly, but his art spoke for him. He left behind a body of work that dignified what society had tried to shame. Through empathy and restraint, he made the invisible visible. Van Johnson. To the wartime audiences of the 1940s, Van Johnson was the perfect American hero, clean-cut, red-haired, and endlessly likable. He starred in 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, A Guy Named Joe, and The Caine Mutiny. On screen, he was the boy next door who never let you down. But off-screen, his life was scripted by others. Rumors about his sexuality swirled through MGM's backlots, prompting studio executives to arrange a convenient marriage to actress Eve Wynn, who happened to be the ex-wife of his best friend. The union was less romance than arrangement, designed to silence gossip and preserve his image. Those close to Johnson described him as kind, deeply religious, and quietly tormented. He lived through decades of silence, performing the role of a lifetime, the perfect straight leading man. In truth, he was another casualty of Hollywood's fear, a man forced to choose safety over sincerity. Van Johnson's films remain cheerful, hopeful, full of warmth. But beneath that optimism was a story of sacrifice, one shared by countless others who smiled for the cameras while hiding in plain sight. Laurence Olivier, Sir Laurence Olivier, the name itself evokes greatness. A towering figure of stage and screen, his mastery of Shakespeare and cinema alike made him one of the 20th century's defining actors. Yet even Olivier, the consummate professional, was not untouched by the complexities of desire and secrecy. His marriages to Jill Esmond and Vivien Leigh were among the most glamorous in the world. But Esmond, his first wife, was rumored to be lesbian, and their union, some biographers suggest, a marriage of convenience. Others whispered that Olivier himself may have had relationships with men during his early years in theater, long before stardom demanded perfection. He never spoke publicly about it, and perhaps he didn't need to. Olivier's performances carried an intensity that felt personal, as though he understood the struggle between truth and appearance more than most. In roles like Hamlet and Richard III, he explored ambition, repression, and the masks people wear, themes not far from his own life. Whether the rumors were true or not, Olivier's legacy reminds us that greatness often comes from complexity and that even legends are human. George Nader was Hollywood's nearly man. Handsome, charming, and forever living in the shadow of Rock Hudson. They shared the same secret, the same circle of friends, and the same powerful agent, Henry Wilson, a man who built stars by trading in whispers and control. Wilson sculpted images and destroyed lives with equal ease. When a scandal threatened to expose Hudson's sexuality, he made a choice, and Nader paid the price. Almost overnight, George's promising career vanished. The same studios that had once praised his potential now shut every door. But Nader refused to vanish. He left Hollywood's hypocrisy behind and built a new life in Europe, where he lived openly with his lifelong partner Mark Miller. Together, they created something far more lasting than fame: freedom. In 1978, Nader wrote Chrome, a science fiction novel about two men who fall in love, a bold, fearless act decades ahead of its time. When asked if he worried about backlash, he smiled and said, "I already lost one career to lies. I might as well gain another with truth." George Nader never became a legend of the screen, but he became something far rarer, a man who chose honesty over illusion, and in doing so wrote his own ending in light, not shadow. Tyrone Power. He was Hollywood's swashbuckler, the dashing hero of The Mark of Zorro and Captain from Castile. With his perfect smile and sword-fighting grace, Tyrone Power embodied adventure itself. Yet behind the charm and applause was a quieter story, one the cameras never caught. During his service in the Marines, Power wrote home about friendships too dear to name. His letters hinted at bonds that went beyond comradeship, at emotions no soldier in that era dared define. After the war, the whispers followed him back to Hollywood, linking him to actor Cesar Romero. The two vacationed together in Havana, photographed side by side, radiant and free. No women, no pretense, just two men enjoying a life they could never acknowledge in public. Studios panicked, publicists hurried to rewrite the narrative, arranging marriages and scripted romances to protect their investment in his image. Power went along, ever the professional, smiling for photographs that told only half the truth. Friends later said his happiest moments were not at premieres, but in quiet evenings, brandy in hand, laughter shared among those who understood him. When he died suddenly of a heart attack in 1958, among his belongings was a pressed gardenia, a flower from Romero's hillside home. Maybe it was a token of friendship, maybe more. But in a world built on staged love stories, that single silent flower said everything the studios never could. Paul Lynde could make America laugh until it blushed with a single wink, a twisted grin, and a line so sharp it could cut through live television. On Bewitched in Hollywood Squares, he became a comic legend, the man who said what others only dared to think. But behind that razor wit was a heart shaped by loneliness and the cost of hiding in plain sight. He was flamboyant, but never allowed to be free. His humor became his armor, every joke a clever disguise for truths he could never speak aloud. Gay bars, he once quipped, I call them church socials. The audience roared, never realizing that beneath the laughter was a man performing his own survival. At home, friends recalled the warmth behind the sarcasm, his beloved golden retrievers named Harry, his endless martinis, and his generosity that never made the headlines. Yet tragedy followed him. The accidental death of a lover in the 1960s broke something inside, and alcohol became both companion and cage. Still, he never stopped performing. Even as his body tired, the spark never dimmed. When he died at 55, Hollywood Squares host Peter Marshall said, Paul gave the world laughter and kept the tears backstage. Paul Lynde's legacy isn't only laughter, it's courage wrapped in comedy. He taught the world that sometimes the funniest men carry the heaviest hearts, and that humor, in its purest form, can be an act of truth. Danny Kaye was energy in motion, a whirlwind of song, dance, and quicksilver comedy. He could light up a stage, charm a crowd, and move seamlessly from laughter to grace in a single heartbeat. To audiences, he was joy itself. But behind the rhythm and radiance, whispers followed like a familiar melody, stories of affection that defied convention. Kaye's warmth was magnetic, and his friendships ran deep, none more so than with Sir Laurence Olivier. According to Noel Coward's diaries, the two shared a quiet intimacy, letters filled with inside jokes, long trips together, and a bond wrapped in laughter and secrecy. The press never dared to ask too directly. Perhaps they knew that Kaye's answer would be as elusive as his humor. He was married to songwriter Sylvia Fine, his creative partner and confidant. She once said, creativity needs freedom, and Danny had plenty of it. It was a union built not on convention but understanding. When asked about the rumors, Kaye smiled and said, a rumor is just a story without its punchline. Behind that grin was a tenderness the world rarely saw, a man who believed love didn't need an explanation. Danny Kaye danced past labels with the same effortless grace he brought to every performance. Fast, free, and unforgettable, he lived as he performed with heart, humor, and a rhythm all his own. In the end, Hollywood's golden age was more than its movies. It was a world built on illusions, not just on screen but in life. Behind every tuxedoed smile and perfectly lit close-up were people hiding their deepest truths, punished for something as simple as love, yet even in silence they changed the world. Each one, Rock Hudson, Raymond Burr, Tab Hunter, Anthony Perkins, and all the others, carried the weight of two lives. And by doing so, they paved the way for a future where no one would have to hide again. Today, their stories are no longer secrets whispered in the dark. They are history, and history deserves to be remembered. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves classic cinema. Your support helps keep these forgotten voices alive, the ones who built Hollywood not just with beauty but with bravery. Because the truest legacy of the Golden Age is that even in silence, love endured.